Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Invest Africa. I'm Alicia Seckham. Well, the World Bank's Doing Business report for 2013 looks at the ease of doing business in a particular country. Out of the 185 countries globally and overtaking Kenya, Uganda ranked number 120. But the country dropped one place in that ranking, citing cross-border trading as its Achilles heel. This week, we take a closer look at the opportunities and challenges that Uganda presents when doing business in the East African country.
With a total surface area of roughly 241,000 square kilometers, the East African country of Uganda is home to some 34 million people. In a bid to move the country towards economic prosperity for the people of Uganda, the country is focusing on providing a conducive investment climate through macroeconomic policies aimed at modernizing and growing the economy. The oil sector is one of its key drivers.
The country is a #1 performer on the FDI attraction side, with about 1.2 billion US dollars worth of FDI coming in, mainly driven by oil, and the oil sector. So that is expected to drive growth there.
But to ensure the long-term economic growth, Uganda will need to do more to improve its cross-border operations.
By focusing our programs and projects in improving infrastructure like railways, roads and telecommunications so that we reduce the cost of doing business, but also by enhancing agricultural productivity as well as manufacturing.
According to the World Bank's Doing Business 2013 report, exporting a container of goods from Uganda requires the processing of 7 documents and at least 33 days to reach the destination. This at a cost of $3,050 or 7.9 million shillings. Importing costs can also be as much as $3,200 or 8 million shillings. The main challenge of integrated countries such as the ones in the East African community is the comparable infrastructure. Therefore, initiatives such as the development funds for the regions will go a long way in not only ensuring that the country transforms into an attractive investment destination, but that the region as a whole becomes a market for those looking to do business on the African continent. Dumisha Mahanyele, Johannesburg.
Well, joining me in studio this week to take a closer look at Uganda as a business and investment destination is Stephen Sutherland. He's Sales Director for Africa Fleet Services at Mix Telematics. Alan Mutono is the MD of Mutono Technologies, and Kayize Matovu Kasozi is a counsellor at the Ugandan High Commission as well. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining me today. And let's get straight into conversation now, because if we start off with you, Alan, looking at Mutono Technologies specifically, you've got operations in Uganda, but that spans to Johannesburg, Bloemfontein, Hong Kong and China as well. How do you rate doing business in Uganda?
Well, I can't come up with a rating of a scale of, say, 2 out of 10. I can still put it at 5 out of 10. Essentially, Uganda offers quite tremendous number of opportunities. Likewise, in all the other countries where we do business from, particularly in South Africa, where we actually base our head offices here. However, it's always worthwhile we find worthwhile to put our effort there because of the returns. We get better returns on our investments or on our efforts within the country. We mainly operate in providing systems for government, operations. And over a period of time, obviously, you come across a number of challenges, particularly when we go to Hong Kong, we're able to operate more smoothly. And then in South Africa, it's still a bit similar. You get a lot of systems that you can always access, offices to go to, then you predict what's going to happen a week later. And then when you go to Uganda, we're still growing. We're still putting up a number of systems. The laws are still being drafted. So there's always a delay This is a delay. But
we will be getting into the challenges of doing business in the territory. For now, Stephen, I mean, Mixed Telematics, one of the businesses that has not only set up shop in Uganda, but it's chosen the territory as its headquarter based for the rest of Africa operations for the business. So what was the appeal there? Because we had Alan highlighting better returns, certainly standing as one incentive.
I think within our industry, being as close to your customers as possible is quite essential. Any delays in getting anything with regards to hardware and services is just going to position you very poorly with your competitors. We also learned, we've been doing business in Africa since the early 2000s, and we've learned the only way to get to know your market is to be in your market. So it was very important. So
prior to this, you were operating remotely with South Africa as your home base?
Absolutely, very much on a remote control type basis, which means you couldn't really have a good relationship with your market. So the picking Uganda was done through quite a bit of self-searching and quite a bit of research, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later. But again, it's geographic positioning. So we're looking at it, we're running it for our East Africa community operations, which was a good contributor from the African side of things. And so positioning ourselves there to get a better footprint and solidify our position there was important.
What sense do you get of foreign investor sentiment towards Uganda and the business environment right now? Because when you look at that East African region, Kayiza, it's often Nairobi in Kenya that stands out as the business hub in the East African region.
Well, it shows that we still have a lot of opportunities, because if you go into a market that's already close to saturation, then you're bound to start with a lot of competition. If you go into close to virgin territory, I wouldn't say that Uganda is virgin territory, but there are still many more opportunities to exploit in Uganda. Therefore, it places us at an advantage in that we are offering, first of all, more incentives, because we are bending over backwards to ensure that we to get...
Let's get specific there. I mean, what kind of incentives? When you say you're bending over backwards, what exactly are you putting on the table for investors to entice them your way?
What we'll do, we'll ensure that if you come to invest, if you want to invest in Uganda, you have a one-stop shop. That is the Uganda Investment Authority, where most of the activities will be accomplished. We offer incentives like tax holidays, first arrival privileges, a waiver of withholding tax on capital goods, things like that, to ensure that if you are looking at ways of keeping your costs of setting up low, then you look at Uganda.
As an investor in the Ugandan territory, Stephen, I mean, what's your sense of doing business in the territory from a regulatory perspective? Just how easy is it? Because as I said, we've got Uganda currently ranking number 120 out of 125 countries that are assessed by the World Bank.
I think as far as ease is concerned, we measured it, and when we first looked at it, we looked at somebody who had a tax legislation very similar to our own. So it wasn't as if we were going to something completely foreign. I think, yes, we would like to see things made a little bit easier. What we cannot complain about is efficiency. The URA is probably one of the most efficient revenue authorities that we've ever had to deal with. But yes, I think where we would like a little bit more focus is obviously on the import VAT. You don't always get it back, which does put a few cash constraints on your cash flow within your business, especially for startups. And if we can have a look at something like that, that would definitely be a good way forward.
Of course, when it comes to any African territory, Alan, we've got investors constantly looking at the macroeconomic scenario in the country and then political stability, just where we stand in that regard. And in both those instances, I mean, we've had Uganda, for example, boasting stability in inflation that stood at single digits over the past 10 years. GDP growth rate sitting on average at 6% per year. So good macroeconomic stability coming through. What about the political side of things?
Well, politically, the country is very stable. We haven't had any serious wars since 2005 when the bandit colony left the country. I mean, when it was pushed out into Central African Republic. So, however, you know, when you quoted earlier about the report from the World Bank, and there are several reports out there that will you know, paint a different picture from what might actually be happening. Steve mentioned that to get to know your market, you've got to be in your market. When you look at Uganda above the rim, when you look at it in the figures and what institutions say about the general economy, you will miss the picture. The best picture is actually on the ground. Many companies, South African companies, have found to their surprise. I will mention names, ShopRite, Standard Bank, and MTN, and several others. You know, when they go in, they expect a growth rate of, say, 2% or 3%. But within no time, their infrastructure is under pressure with the demand that comes in. Because most of the Uganda is a lot of activities are very informal. People work on a cash-to-cash basis. If you ask someone to deposit money for you, it may take a while. But if you say, I'm coming to fetch it or can come and pay it, it's faster that way. So that took us into a lot of your operations. And just to emphasize the point is that there is a lot of potential, and you have to get in there, interact with people on a daily basis, interact with them on a daily basis, see what they eat, how much fuel they use a day, how much airtime they use, and then you get a clear picture.
Are governments putting the systems in place that afford them to leverage off the opportunity, off that opportunity by putting the right incentives on the table for investors? And I ask the question because about 3 years ago, a comment was made that Uganda's hazardous business environment stands as an impediment to foreign investment in the country, especially where you've got mixed signals about government's commitment, and policy as well. It's a problem that we've seen surface in South Africa as well, and we've seen just what kind of an impact that can have on investor sentiment. To what extent is that still a concern for investors wanting to operate in the territory?
It is a big concern. There's a lot of business risk, mainly brought through by the imbalances that you find in the rivers of business. For instance, the tax or the reigning financial system. As well as there's always a specter of corruption hanging over everything that goes on. And then when you put it all together, if you compare how investment will fare in, let's say, in South Africa or in a quite developed place like Hong Kong and in Uganda, Uganda will come up short because of that. But as you also know that in these two countries I've mentioned, the margins are always lower in whatever you do. And yet they will be higher in Uganda, where you may score up to 50% return on your investment, but with more risk. However, the government has also done quite a lot of work. There's the Investment Authority, which is a one-stop center, where you, instead of going through 7 or 8 different institutions, you go to one and you do all the rest of the work for you in the shortest time possible. That is coming through. There's still a lot of room for improvement. You get across instances where your shipments will be delayed at the border for 4 weeks, and then you might have to push what they call push the envelope. And again, it also comes to how you get into the market. If you come in with a view that you're going to push the envelope all across the road, then you're bound to fail. If you come with an ethical perspective and say you want to push the envelope, use systems, then eventually the systems come towards you.
Of course, that drawing to an extent the spotlight to efficiencies in a system. Straight after the break, we take a look at some of the other incentives that come along with doing business in the East African territory. And a part of it is the fact that Uganda is part of COMESA, and members within that COMESA bloc actually enjoy an 80% tariff reduction operating in the regional market. That's guaranteed, and certainly it attracts investor attention. There's more on Invest Africa when we return, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Invest Africa, where this week we're taking a closer look at Uganda as a business and investment destination. Still in studio with me today is Stephen Sutherland. He's Sales Director for Africa Fleet Services at Mix Telematics. Alan Mutono is the MD of Mutono Technologies, and Kayiza Motovu Kasozi is a councillor at the Ugandan High Commission as well. Stephen, We had the insert in part one of the show highlight that to ensure long-term economic growth, Uganda will need to do more to improve its cross-border operations. As I highlighted a little earlier on in the show, you have used, or you are using now, Kampala, Uganda as a base to your rest of Africa operations. Just how much of a challenge is it dealing with the challenges that come with doing cross-border trade from Uganda specifically?
I think getting goods into Uganda, I think Alan already mentioned a couple of the sticky points that we have there. I think what we have found is it's still a lot easier than doing it directly from RSA because you're already to a large extent halfway there. But I think we've found is not so much the problem of getting the goods across, it's the documentation and paperwork coming back. And
never mind the costs that were highlighted.
Never mind the costs. I think at the end of the day is for us, we can get, if we bulk the hardware into the country, we do start getting a few economies of scale coming through there from our side. But we're finding that we lose those economy scales very quickly and we hit the market at essentially the same with the same issues that we had before, just because it takes such a long time. If we can get those things a little bit more efficient. I must admit it's a lot easier working within the East African community. The moment you break out of the East African community, then you're essentially on a little bit of a road to nowhere at the moment.
What's your view on the effectiveness of trading blocks? Because we've got COMESA on the one hand, but you've also got that East African market protocol that was recently signed, and that putting the East African territories pretty much on the same page with the same agenda.
There's nothing that can beat numbers. But first of all, in the East African community, we have a combined population of 150, and the way we operate in our region, in the East African community region, with or without that bloc, we are more or less a homogeneous people. That is Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. And then the East African community framework formalizes it, so there's nothing that can beat that arrangement. And if like one regional envoy put it, if you invest, let's say in Uganda, you are getting a package of buy one, get four free. So you come to Uganda, then it means you're moving into Kenya, Tanzania. You can easily move into Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, and Rwanda. But then there are other members who are who are our neighbors, but outside the East African community, who are in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan. These make it much more attractive in that they are closely linked to Uganda, and so anyone wanting to do business in Uganda is welcomed automatically into all those economies.
Alan, we've had Kaiser there highlighting the formal structures that are in place that, that investors can certainly derive benefit from. As a business, though, operating, to what extent do you actually, in reality, derive that benefit?
It's still a halfway journey in that you can access certain incentives. And also, many of the planned investments that bring the East African community together are still in the making. There is a silver lining ahead of it. For instance, for many decades, almost 100, the gateway into Uganda has been the port of Mombasa, the rail line on the highway until the border. But now, government has announced construction of an inland port along the lake that will open up alternative route through Dar es Salaam. Dar es Salaam is not as highly utilized as Mombasa is. So that will also bring some breathing space on that route. Mm-hmm. And then, as anyone who works in the market will tell you, that you set out to do something, and then you have a time of 6 months or 1 year to achieve it. But then those impediments have been highlighted, will affect you. However, to stay away, you damage yourself further. As business, you don't expect it to be smooth. Where the risk is higher, the gain is higher. I've said it earlier. Furthermore, Mr. mentions that we've got, in East Africa, it's a market of 150 million people, and that's about almost 10% or more, 10% of the Africa's population. And this is almost a homogeneous market. Common language, only two, English and Swahili. So you can brand something in Swahili and you still sell, or brand in English and then you still sell. Then, but in terms of still on investment, staying relevant to what this show is about, is different sectors will give you different benefits.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, we cannot talk about this economy, you know, as one entity. We've got to look at the different sectors, but certainly something that does affect all sectors of the economy, Stephen, and we had Alan highlight it and allude to it a little earlier, is the challenge that an infrastructure deficit presents. In your books, just how much of a challenge has that presented right now? Because we often hear the first mover advantage reason being cited as you know, a significant enough reason for moving into territories like this that aren't perhaps as mature as some of the other economies on the continent. But then you've got to deal with deficits like that of infrastructure where development still needs to take place.
I think for us it's a bit of a two-edged sword. If we have a look at it based on the industry that we're in, and I think Alan alluded to the fact that depending on which sector you're playing in, if we look at transport and logistics is a huge portion of our market. So any infrastructure deficiencies that exist become a major issue within their lives. That's what we help them to solve. So the issues are something we can help them to identify efficiencies with regards to how they move. But again, yes, we also then suffer the fate of making sure that any goods that we're moving out of the country also generally suffer the same fate. So it's a little bit of a, as I said, a bit of a two-edged sword at the moment.
Is enough of a stride being made and enough of a focus being placed on infrastructure development?
I think when we had a look at it first, and obviously we've been through a number of countries in Africa, I think there's always a lot more that can be done. As far as where it's positioned with regards to other countries, and I think if we look at it from road congestion, I think we're all kind of suffer that same fate. I think a lot has been done. I think as Alan and I would both like to see it happen a lot quicker. And again too, is if we can find there's some alternative routes in being able to move stuff from place to place.
Of course, Kaiza, there's always room for development funds in the region and the role that they have to play in actually seeing development like this happen on the continent as a whole. Are we seeing appetite? Are we seeing that interest come through from, or that supportive role being played by development funds in Uganda?
We have a tripartite arrangement. We have already had two summits. There's COMESA, East African Community, and SADC. And one of the main focuses of that tripartite cooperation is infrastructure development. But then, as the trend is these days, it's more, if things are to move faster, we have to look at the private sector. And I mentioned at the beginning that this is, it's a challenge, granted, but it's more of an opportunity. And when you talk about Africa as the investment destination of the future, then this shows there's a lot that you can reap from investing in infrastructure in Africa, or let's say in East Africa or in Uganda.
You highlight the role that the private sector has to play. What room is there for PPPs? Are we seeing that take off to an extent in Uganda?
Oh, PPP, that is what is being embraced at the moment. I think by now that we have had a couple of visits from Ugandan officials to South Africa to study how PPPs are operating. And if we are to develop infrastructure in Uganda, and indeed in the region, PPP is the way to go as a first step.
Alan, we've been talking about deficits on the infrastructure side. What about on the skill side? Because aside from you being an entrepreneur and the MD of Mutono Technologies, you're also part of the Association of Ugandan Professionals in South Africa. And I've got to ask the question, are we looking at a brain drain out of Uganda?
You know, when talk about skills, that is one of Uganda's undiscovered gems. There are a lot of skilled people within the country.
So just as many skills, Ugandan skills that we have in South Africa, we've got in Uganda.
We've got, and a lot of supply, oversupplied actually. There are more than 22 universities, many of which are private. The education standard is very good in Uganda. It's a British-founded education system, and we've had excellent professionals coming out of that system. And there are several of us actually within South Africa as well, whom I represent on Association of Uganda Professionals. And then we've also found a movement back and forth. They come South African, they work for a while with the corporations here. When the corporations open branches in Uganda, they go back and work there. However, what might be what we're lacking in the country is on-the-job training. You can have the best electrical engineer to work in Stephen's company, but it's telematics, but you still have to get him on the job, your trade skills.
Very quickly, Stephen, do you share that, that kind of experience of the skills base that you have access to operating in the country?
Yes, absolutely, Alicia. I think it was also one of the very much positives or the ticks in the box when we had a look at Uganda. So not only do you have people that have a very strong work ethic, but again you have people that can accommodate and adopt to your technology and very much the ways in which you do business, and also they teach you. So it's very much a skills transfer in both directions. And yes, they're good people to work with. There's a strong entrepreneurial spirit that flows there and is very contagious. I was just saying earlier on that's where we go to have our batteries charged.
Well, a good place to leave it. Let's leave it there, gentlemen. Unfortunately, 30 minutes, not enough time to delve into every aspect in terms of business opportunities and challenges that a country like Uganda presents. But thanks so much for your time. We've come to the end of this edition of Invest Africa. And thanks to my guest, Stephen Sutherland, who's the Sales Director for Africa at Mixed Telematics, Alan Motono, MD of Motono Technologies, and Kahiza Motovo Kasozi, who's a counsellor at the Ugandan High Commission as well. Until next week, from me, Alicia Second, it's goodbye.